Welcome to episode 54 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined in virtual studio by my good friend, my colleague, and the man who is investigating owning an electric car, John Scott Sloat.
I leave no stone unturned, Doc. No stone.
Yes, you tend to be, you're not like the most or the earliest adopter of new technology, but you're towards the front end of that curve, I think.
I adopt technology, particularly if it can save me money, which is why I'm looking into the electric car. But I do like being on the front edge. I wouldn't call myself, I think there was a period of time where I was the earliest adopter, where I was like, new iPhone, gotta have it. But I since, that hurts the pocketbook quite a bit. And
yes,
a year or two old are much cheaper than brand new things, as I learned through my 20s. So, don't want to be an early adopter.
So other than that, John, how are we doing?
Good. It was a busy week. It was a big week in sports. We got a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about. But before we do that, we want to remind our listeners that you can connect with us on Twitter at V&S Pod. We have a Facebook page that you can like and follow. That's Various and Sundry Podcast. You can do us a favor. It's been a while since this has happened, but you can go onto the podcast app and leave us a review and a 5-star rating if you're so inclined. And we do have an email address that you can email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. And that leads us to a mea culpa moment here on the podcast.
Yeah. So this week, for whatever reason, I was going through email addresses on my iPhone. And I realized that a couple of them had been signed out of somehow. And I had no idea. One of them was the Various and Sundry podcast. So I was thinking for months, since like June, that we weren't getting any podcast emails, that nobody was emailing in. Turns out we had gotten several emails from listeners that I now feel guilty about. So first of all, my apologies. If you emailed something in the last 6 months, which is half the existence of our podcast, and I have not responded, because of that, I just had it on the phone. And so I planned an apology email to those of you that have emailed in. My sincerest apologies. I'll get some of that going today.
Yeah, we just need to be a better version of us when it comes to checking in on that email and making sure that we're responding to our listeners. So we do want to offer our apologies and express our commitment to do better.
Yeah, and really, we're going to shift blame to Apple and say this is really just all Apple's fault for signing us out, or maybe Google. It's Google's fault for signing us out of our Gmail account.
It's all part of their master plan.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of master plan, Alabama had a master plan last night in the national championship game that they executed to near perfection, dominating Ohio State, winning 52-24. Bama was clearly the better team. And, it's disappointing to see Ohio State lose like that. I would like to have seen if Ohio State had been at full strength. I think the game would have been more competitive. I think it was pretty crushing for them to lose Trey Sermon on the first play of the game. Sure. I think a lot of their offense was built around his running as well as passing to him out of the backfield. And the backup that they have, Master Teague, is just not built the same way. He's more of a bowling ball kind of running back, not a shifty, make guys miss kind of guy. But that doesn't take anything away. Bama was the better team.
By the way, some of the best named running backs in the league right there. Sermon and Master Teague. I mean, come on. Hard to beat those names.
And the third stringer is Steel Chambers.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good one.
I mean, you can make the argument Ohio State has the best running back room in the country when it comes to names.
Absolutely. I don't even think it's a competition.
So obviously disappointed at that. I will say that when I step back and think about the fact that in late August, early September, it looked like there would be no Ohio State football this fall. That brings me a measure of perspective to say I'm grateful that we got to see even 8 games of Justin Fields before he is a first-round draft pick this upcoming spring. So grateful for that, but disappointed they didn't put their best foot forward on this in the championship game here. But, they did get the Clemson monkey off their back, got some revenge from that loss last year. But overall, still a very, very good season.
Any way too early predictions about next season for the Buckeyes?
Well, they lose a lot. I mean, they're going to lose Justin Fields at quarterback. They're going to lose Trey Sermon. They're going to lose a couple of offensive linemen. They're going to lose all of their starting linebackers. So they'll have a lot to replace. I mean, there's plenty of talent there. It's just a matter of how quickly it develops.
Yeah. Okay. Other than the college football playoff, which happened last night, we're recording Tuesday morning. We had the NFL wild card weekend, which was wonderful. Actually, 6 games, most of them pretty good.
Aren't we supposed to call it the super wild card weekend or something? Wasn't that some marketing shtick that the NFL did?
Yeah, but it's here to stay, right?
Yeah. But that specific title.
But yeah, I suppose so. But they were all pretty good games. There weren't any major blowouts, although the Browns seemed to have a major blowout through the first quarter.
Yeah, what a start. Did you watch the start of that game?
These late night starts, I usually make it to about halftime, and then
I think you saw pretty much everything you needed to see if you saw the first quarter of that Browns-Steelers game. I mean, I got done with I forget where we were. I think we had Life Group. So I got home and turned the TV on, and I saw the Browns were up 7-0, and there was only like 15 seconds gone in the game, and I was very confused. And so you rush to Twitter to find out, oh, okay, the Steelers did their best Broncos imitation from the Super Bowl a few years ago. You remember this when Peyton Manning was the Broncos quarterback? Was that against Seattle, I think?
Yeah, that was the Super Bowl Seattle crushing.
Yeah. Basically the same thing, right? Rockets snap over the quarterback's head and Browns end up falling on it for a touchdown. And the snowball just kept gaining steam as it went down the mountain there. So congrats to the Browns for their first playoff win since 1995. John, how old were you in 1995?
Oh goodness, I was in the first grade in 95.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I was, and I'm now 32. So you can do the math. I was a tyke.
Yeah. So the rest of the anything else stand out to you from the wild card games this weekend?
No, not too much. Did you see the Twitter on Tom Brady's account? Did you see this?
No.
Where because the next game is, I believe, Tampa Bay against the Saints.
Yes.
And it had Tom Brady and Drew Brees as very elderly men holding football. So Drew Brees is bald. Tom Brady, who still had a full head of hair, but it was all gray, and he had a long, thick beard, and their skin is all wrinkly. And it was said that the game was going to be on the History Channel.
Nice.
It was pretty awesome. Okay,
speaking of alternate platforms, though, for NFL games, did you see that Nickelodeon did a broadcast of the Saints? Who did they play this weekend? Saints against Bears. That's right.
Yeah.
Did you see this?
I saw that it happened, and I saw that they announced somebody got slimed, or somebody earned the slime award, or something along those lines, and it was Trubisky.
Well, yeah, it's obviously a ploy to get younger fans, young kids into the game. And they did all these different graphics and stuff in terms of like when the Saints scored a touchdown, like they had the slime cannons shooting, the graphics over the end zone and stuff like that. And, interesting little gimmick they did there.
Yeah.
Though someone pointed out almost all the commercials were exactly the same as the main feed on the broadcast network feed. And so, they're pointing out, okay, so you're trying to draw kids in, but then you've got these commercials that are obviously not kid oriented. So
yeah, and if they continue to do that, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out that formula. They'll write the contracts, depending on how well it did. I haven't seen any reporting, but
yeah,
it's an interesting idea. I love the creativity of it.
I agree. So we are on to the divisional round this upcoming weekend: Browns versus Chiefs and Ravens versus Bills in the AFC, and then in the NFC, Bucks versus Saints and Rams versus Packers. Who do you like at an initial glance at that?
Certainly Packers, and I'm sorry, Browns fans. I probably like the Chiefs in that game. The Browns have been a fun story, but I think the Chiefs are a far superior team.
I think most Browns fans are pretty realistic, though. Like, I don't think there's a ton of Browns fans out there who are like, we are going to win this game, no doubt about it. Like, I think most of them are like, yeah, that's going to be a tall order. And, but strange things happen in the playoffs. It's not outside the realm of possibility. It would be a huge upset to be sure, but
I think I'm most excited maybe for the Ravens-Bills game. That could just be a lot of fun with, I watched the Bills for the first time this weekend, and Josh Allen's a lot of fun to watch. And obviously Lamar Jackson is a good watch as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, the NFC, Bucks versus Saints is an interesting matchup with Tom Brady and Drew Brees, as was mentioned. And then Rams versus Packers. If I understand correctly, I think that's number one defense versus number one offense in the NFL.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll see how that shakes out. And then our last note on the sports front.
So excited.
A major tectonic shift in the balance of Major League Baseball. John, tell us what happened.
So my New York Mets made a trade for Francisco Lindor of the Indians. And we lost a couple good players, Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez, as well as a couple of minor leaguers. But we got back Francisco Lindor and Carrasco, a pitcher, both of whom are all-stars and just excellent players. So super excited to see them on the team. And everybody basically says that they got them for next to nothing.
Yeah, it certainly made Nate from Ohio quite salty when the news broke on that. And it's a pretty obvious salary dump by the Indians. And in fairness, if you don't think you're going to be able to re-sign him, it makes sense to get something for him rather than just have him walk out the door and get nothing.
But as I think Nate in Ohio pointed out to us in text messages, the Indians' payroll is now the same as Grace College's payroll. Is that?
I'm not sure the numbers on that, but but it was a good line. It was a good line for sure. But
I'm very, very excited. Was jumping excited, and they're supposed to make more moves to do more trades. So what they come up with next week or two.
Well, I think it's time for us to move on to our main topic for the day. And we are going to talk about catechesis, which is a word that maybe some of our listeners may not be familiar with. You might be familiar with the word catechism. Mm-hmm. So catechesis is obviously closely related to that. And why don't we start with just some basics of what is catechesis and why does it matter? John, what comes to mind is someone were to say to you, what is that and why does it matter?
So I did not grow up with catechesis or catechism, but I see it as an important thing. My understanding of it is it's a question and answer form. So who is God? And then there's a standard answer that is to be repeated, memorized, understood. And then there are lots of different versions of this. But it's for religious instruction. It's for teaching the faith either to lay people in the church, to children, to a variety of individuals. And it's supposed to sort of outline this is what denomination believes or stands behind.
Yeah. And I think that, for our Greek students out there, this idea of catechesis comes from the Greek verb katekeo, which means to instruct or to teach orally. That verb's found in Luke 1:4 to talk about the idea of instructing believers. Same is true in 1 Corinthians 14:19, Galatians 6:6. So it has its roots at the earliest moments of the church when it comes to a form of instruction that's intended to give the basics of the Christian faith in summary form, to provide a framework for understanding one's faith. And from what I gathered, doing a little bit of show prep here, it seems like Luther was the first one to put it into a question and answer format rather than just a sort of series of statements.
Oh, really? That's interesting. I knew he had one, but wasn't aware that he had written the first question and answer form. Did you grow up on catechism?
I didn't. I did not. So I was certainly late to the game on that.
What was your first exposure to it? Like when did you first learn about it or hear about it?
I think it was probably. I think I probably got exposed to it at some level in college, just becoming familiar with or hearing about, the Westminster Confession of Faith and the catechism that went with it. But really, it wasn't until our children were born and we started to think about how do we instruct them in the faith that it became more of a felt need in terms of thinking about this idea of catechism. So that's where I really became most familiar with it. And in one sense, that makes sense because, if you think about the responsibility of parents to pass on the faith to their children, you think of a passage like Deuteronomy 6, verses 4-9, that after the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Right after that, our instructions about you should teach these things to your children. You should talk about them as you're going through your day. You should, write them on the doorposts of your door. So you're creating this environment where you're instructing the next generation of people on the basics of the faith. What about you? When did you sort of first get exposed to this idea?
Yeah, I think it was probably similar to you, probably in college or seminary. I think maybe even the first time was at the Gospel Coalition that I was able to hear it talked about, and then was able to explore New City Catechism that we'll talk about probably in a little bit, and was able to was able to play with it. I think New City Catechism first came out as an app, and so you were able to go on there, look at the question, find the answer, and watch a video from a pastor describe what this was. And I don't know if that's still out there. I know they've put that catechism into book form, which is great. But I was using it to teach junior high Sunday school at the church I was attending. So I would go in, we'd have one of these questions, we'd talk about it, we'd read some of the passages that were a part of this. We'd watch the video in the New City Catechism app, and trying to do some of the things that you just said, pass on that faith to a younger generation, and that was my junior high Sunday school curriculum that I was teaching through. But I will say that I did not tell them it was called a catechism. I also didn't tell parents, or frankly, the pastor at the time, that it was a catechism that I was teaching through. Because I had this innate sense that there's a number of evangelicals that really struggle with the term catechism, and even the process of it. Could you talk maybe about that and what fear is there?
Yeah, I think on one level, I think a lot of evangelicals have a gut level reaction to anything that smells of ritual. And so this idea of a rote sense of here's a question, here's an answer, memorize it, I think rubs some evangelicals the wrong way, just in principle. And I also think that along similar lines, it seems like within the history of the church that catechisms have tended to be more associated with high church traditions rather than low church traditions. And if you don't know what that distinction means, basically, high church is more structured in their worship, a lot more detailed listing of we do this, then we do this, then we do this, tend to have more structure in terms of how the church is governed and run. And low church tends to be the opposite of that in terms of a lot less structure, more free-flowing, both in terms of how worship is put together, as well as even just how churches are organized and run.
Yeah. And I do think there are some people who grew up maybe in more of a high church, and I've run across individuals that have had this experience where, they didn't open scripture when they talked in Sunday school or anything like that. They just memorized the catechism, which isn't the point, right? We want to take those truths and we want to understand where they come from, and we want to store them deep inside of us.
And when you go back to, really, the Reformation was not that catechism didn't exist before that, but the Reformation, a lot of the reformers even explicitly said that they perceived themselves as rediscovering and not reinventing, but more rediscovering this idea of catechism, of creating simple summaries of the faith as a means of helping their people understand scripture.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of it was to give people a framework for understanding the content of scripture, so that when they read scripture, they had hooks to put things on as they were reading about God and reading about his plan of redemption and who Jesus is and those kinds of things, so that it was never intended to replace scripture. It was intended to be this kind of skeleton structure for you to put things together as you read the Bible. And so that's why, Luther, Calvin, several reformers created these kinds of catechisms as a means of helping believers organize what the Bible said about key things to provide that entry point into reading scripture faithfully.
And I think that's an important point that you just said, and that maybe we've communicated up until this point that this is for children. This is for young believers as we pass on the faith to the next generation, which we certainly want to do. We certainly want to be excited about. We certainly want to be a part of. But this is for all believers, whether you have been in the church 10, 15, 20, 25 years. This is for you. You can come away from catechism learning something, or catechesis learning something new, being reminded of truths, having those brought up afresh.
Absolutely. And just for a minute to go back to the benefit for kids, we did not use, when our kids were growing up, the New City Catechism didn't exist. If it did, we would have used that, I'm sure. But we actually used a modified version of the Westminster Shorter Catechism that a pastor friend had created.
Oh,
and it was great. And our kids to this day still remember many of the answers to that catechism that we worked through with them. And one of the and my boys will hate me saying this, but one of the most adorable videos in the Harmon Family Video archive is of our boys giving answers to the questions. And I'm going to have to resist the urge to post that on social media. It's stinking adorable.
Yeah, we may need to edit out. We may need to edit this out for the sake of your.
Not a chance. Not a chance. It's adorable. But the point of saying that is, those things stuck, and even the things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to repeat word for word the answer today, that helped form the basic sort of substructure of their understanding of who God is and what he is like and what he has done in human history for our redemption. So I think sometimes people can get so hung up on, well, what if they don't remember the answers to it, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I would say that's not necessarily the most important thing. That 5 years from now, that your kids can repeat verbatim the exact answers to the questions from the catechism. But what is important is that you're forming that foundation for your children to understand the world around them from a biblical worldview. But back to your point, and I think this is important. I want to put the double exclamation point emphasis on, this is not just for kids. And so the tools that we'll talk about here shortly, when it comes to this, should not just be heard as, well, if you have kids, you should, consider these tools. No, these are of benefit for you as an individual believer, and for the pastors out there. These are tools that I think you should consider incorporating into some form within your broader ministry, and not just in the kids ministry wing of things, which that's a great thing. I know at our church, we use the New City Catechism, and our children's ministry director does a great job of incorporating that. And I'm thrilled. And it's fun to hear little kids saying these answers where you're like, you don't even necessarily, you only grasp like the surface level of how profound what you just said was, but it's providing the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like an investment. You put those things in when they're young, and it grows, or it has the potential to grow. But yes, and what a good time of year to start as either a family or a couple, or as a single person. Working your way through a catechism, and the New City Catechism, correct me if I'm wrong, is 52 questions, and the idea is you're going through one question a week and memorizing the answer.
Yeah, I had not really checked out the app that the New City Catechism put together until doing prep for the show, and I will just say it is remarkable. It is so well done. It has one of the things that I appreciate about this most is it has both a sort of what they call a regular mode and a children's mode. Meaning that the children's mode gives a short one sentence answer to the question. So, for example, question 2 in the New City Catechism is, what is God? And so the kid's answer is, God is the creator of everyone and everything. But if you switch it to the full mode, the answer is, God is the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. He is eternal, infinite, and unchangeable in his power and perfection, goodness and glory, wisdom, justice, and truth. Nothing happens except through him and by his will. So what I love about that is you can get the simple, basic answer, and then there's more available to expand on that. And it's got links to scripture passages that teach that doctrine, as well as some commentary from different pastors, whether contemporary or even from church history. Like for question 2 here, you tap on the commentary link there, and a section from Jonathan Edwards comes up, as well as D.A. Carson, just giving further explanation as to the content of what that means. So it's just a fantastic tool, as well as a suggested prayer based on that attribute. So I can't recommend this highly enough in terms of a really helpful tool. Again, not just for kids and parents and children's ministry workers, but for all believers as a way of reminding ourselves about basic truths that provide the framework for putting Scripture together.
Well, Doc, any other resources? Obviously, we recommend New City Catechism. We've talked about it quite a bit, and it's been out for probably 8, 9, 10 years now.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
So it's been tested. It's done well.
And they've got a lot of additional resources on their website in terms of curriculum you can use in a ministry context, teaching ideas, kits with activities and that sort of stuff. So it's top notch.
Yeah. Are there any other catechisms you would recommend? If our listeners are like, my goodness, I'd like a little bit more of this, maybe some more questions, maybe some more depth.
Yeah, I mean, the classics tend to be the Westminster catechisms. There's a shorter one and a larger one. The difference being, again, similar to what we saw with the New City Catechism. The shorter one has shorter, more basic answers, and then the larger catechism has more extended answers and more questions in there as well. Those tend to be, I think, the most widely known. I think there might be one connected with the Heidelberg Confession. There might be a catechism connected with that, I think, as well.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. And then,
I think that's more from a Lutheran perspective. And again, you might work through some of these catechisms and come across a section where you're like, well, that's maybe not quite how my denomination or tradition would understand baptism or something like that. Well, nothing says you have to follow it slavishly.
Yeah, and we'll post links to the New City Catechism, the larger and shorter Westminster Catechism, as well as a couple of articles on the value of catechism. If you aren't sold by bringing endorsements, if our endorsements aren't enough for you, we have some smarter people who wrote some things about it. But Doc, other than that, any other thoughts on catechisms before we transition?
Yeah, I will point people towards one of the links will be a link to the Gospel Coalition front page for the topic of catechism. So it'll be a link that has on that page that has 5, 6, 7 different articles on different components of why catechism is valuable. And one of them that I'll just reference quickly is Colin Hansen has an article on that page where he basically makes the point of someone is catechizing your kids. The larger culture, basically the air around them, the school that they're going to, their friends around them, the culture, we're all being in one sense catechized by our culture around us. So if we're not intentional about counteracting that through being immersed in Scripture and even intentional catechism about who God is and what he's doing in the world and how we should live as believers, that the danger is, of course, is that the world's values will have more of a sway on us than they should. So that's just I think a helpful reminder that all of us are being catechized. It's just a matter of how intentional we are about it and what source we're going to for it.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's another conversation we come back to at another time. Ways that we're being going through catechism of culture or religion, whatever it may be. So, with that, Doc, let's turn to our athletes. Do you want to walk us through some of these athletes?
Absolutely. So, we'll start on the professional side. So episode 54, we've got Rich Goose Gossage, who was a relief pitcher in the major leagues from 1972 to 94.
Great name. Great
So,
mix.
I don't know if you remember him at all. That would have been pretty young for you.
Yeah.
He was well known for, he had this mustache that extended down, like it looked like it was going to be a goatee, but the bottom wasn't filled in. So it went all the way down to his chin. Just a great Google images out there if you want to check that out. Pretty dominant relief pitcher for his day. In the NFL, we've got two contributors here. We've got Brian Urlacher, not Brain Urlacher, as I've written on our show notes there. That's Brian Urlacher there. Linebacker for the Bears from 2000 to 2012.
Also known for regrowing your hair products, and if you live in the Chicago area, if you ever drive through, there's always seems to be a billboard of Brian Urlacher growing hair.
Yes, he was a in that sort of tradition of great Bears linebackers.
Yeah,
a terrific player. And then Randy White was a defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys from 75 to 88. Before your time, John, but pretty well known in the NFL during that window. And then we've got two Ohio State players from more recent days. John Simon was a defensive end from 2009 to 2012, and I believe is still in the league. He's played for the Ravens, the Texans, the Colts, the Patriots. He's kind of been around.
Been a bit of a journeyman.
Yes, but a very solid NFL career. And then Billy Price was a center from 2013 to 2017, won a national championship and was an All-American center for Ohio State. And he is currently on the Bengals.
Okay. Who do you like out of this list, Doc? I would narrow it down probably to Urlacher and Goose Gossage. Those would be the two. Goose was clearly a good pitcher, but also just because of his name, I really like. But Brian Urlacher, was playing the whole time when I was learning to love football.
Yeah, I'm inclined to go with Urlacher. I think he was probably the most dominant linebacker of his era, of that early 2000s. I think you could say he was the best linebacker in the NFL for that decade.
It's probably a close race between him and Ray Lewis, if I had to pick another one.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And Urlacher was a guy that was unheralded really out of college. He went to New Mexico.
Really?
Is there New Mexico or New Mexico State? I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah.
So, and he was actually, I think, there more of a safety, but he was just a great athlete, tough guy. So I'm inclined to go with him.
Let's do it.
All right, Brian Urlacher. On to one thing we liked. Let's go with you, John. Let's have you start.
I'm going to go with the Lindor trade. It came right in the middle of the day, and I was.
You're trying to make this Nathan, Ohio's least favorite episode of the podcast, aren't you?
It might be. I was so excited. I called my dad. I was texting several friends who were Indians fans to talk about. All right, how excited should I be about this? And listen to Mets podcasts that were coming out that day, immediate reaction stuff, watching press conferences, watching Steve Cohen's Twitter, all those things. It was a lot of fun, and probably a good portion of my, I think it was Thursday, that was devoted to that. How about yourself?
So I'm going to go with a song that I've been enjoying for a little while now by a group called City Alight, which has put out some good worship music. They've got several songs of theirs that I enjoy, but in particular is a song called Your Will Be Done, which is a great reflection on not only the need for us to obey, but a reflection on Christ's obedience for us. That's really nice. We'll have a link to it in the show notes there for the YouTube video on that people can check that out if they're so inclined.
All right. Well, Doc,
is it here? Is it time?
I think it's time. I think we've arrived.
All right. Yes, we are ready, I think, to call mission accomplished. We have talked about, we began the show with a mea culpa, and again, we will reiterate how deeply sorry we are and commit to repenting right here. We've talked about college football playoff, NFL playoffs, the seismic trade of Lindor to the Mets, and Catechesis and our experience with that. And topping it off with Brian Urlacher, we have done what we set out to do, covering our various and sundry topics. And so until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.